Welcome to another wonderful virtual artist talk. Oh, we've got a good one for you today. My name is Alana Blumenthal, and I am the museum director for the Brigham City Museums. I would like to thank our guests for attending tonight's roundtable to discuss Wild, a juried exhibit from the Studio Art Quilt Associates, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming region. The exhibit is on display through September 17th at the Brigham City Museum of Art and History. For more information on visiting us, please visit our website, brighamcitymuseum.org, or contact us via Facebook, phone, or email. This exhibit comes to us courtesy of our friends at the Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SAQA. You'll hear us say a lot tonight. Their mission is to promote the art quilt and art quilters through exhibitions, education, and community building. The organization's robust programming includes both global exhibitions as well as regional exhibitions like Wild. They have the dual purpose of giving a wide audience of people the opportunity to see fine art created with fabric and stitching, while also giving SAQA members the opportunity to share their work broadly and to grow and challenge their artistic practices. Brigham City Museum of Art and History is a department of the Brigham City Corporation. This exhibit was made possible thanks in part to the support of our annual quilt show sponsor, Village Dry Goods. We also received support from the Box Elder Museum Foundation, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, and our community members. Before I go any further with tonight's program, it is my honor and responsibility to acknowledge that our museum sits on land that is sacred to the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. It has been their stewardship for time immemorial to care for this land and all of its inhabitants. We honor the memory of their ancestors, their physical presence in our region today, and their resilience in preserving their connections to this place. I would like to start tonight by introducing each artist on our panel and giving them each a chance to share. Then we will move on to an open discussion. If you have any questions during the presentations, please submit them in the comments section, and we will do our best to read them out during the Q&A period at the end of tonight's program. For our first speaker today, we are honored to have with us Delores Miller. Delores is a textile artist living in San Jose, California. Her art often expresses wonder at the vastness and complexity of the universe and explores our place in it, our sense of belonging. A recent series of work on this theme incorporates needle felting, embroidery, beading, and unusual materials in wall and sculptural pieces. Delores' love of textiles was ignited at an early age as she threaded needles for her grandmother, a fine hand finisher. She sewed, crocheted, and embroidered, but her first excursion into the quilt world was at the United States Bicentennial. Piecing appealed to her inner puzzle solver, an interest also evidenced in her long career as a research analytical chemist. Delores holds an A.B. degree in chemistry from Bryn Mawr College and an MS degree in analytical organic chemistry from Stanford University, and worked for IBM Research. The decision to focus on textile art as a means of self-expression was deliberate. Delores began exhibiting her work with contemporary quilt and fiber artists in Northern California. Her work has been juried into regional and global exhibitions, including Visions, Interpretations 2021. An active SAQA member, Delores has curated 2 regional exhibitions, chaired its education committee, founded a contemporary art discussion group, and currently serves as board vice president. She served as a co-juror for Wild. I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you, Alana. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. I'm thrilled to be here representing SAQA at this artist roundtable for Wild. This was my first experience on the regional level as a juror, and it was educational and uplifting. And now I hope I have good colleagues in both Alana at the museum and Petra Fallot, who unfortunately couldn't be here this evening. Okay. So I'm going to start I'm going to share my screen and talk about, okay. All righty. Here we go. So as Alana said, Studio Art Quilt's mission is to promote the art quilt. Our definition of the art quilt is kind of fuzzy, but loosely, if it's layered and it's stitched, we consider it part of the art quilt world. More important than what SAQA is who SAQA is. And we're a dynamic and active global community, and I really mean global. We have members around the world of 4,000, not only artists, but curators and collectors and art professionals and gallerists and anybody who has any interest at all in the art quilt and the art quilt form. This is the place to go for anything you want to know about SAQA. It is really an extensive website. We cover all of our exhibitions, all of our community, all of our regional information. This is the landing spot for anything you want to know about SAQA and its members. So the most important thing, I think, is our exhibition program, because this is how we best fulfill our mission of promoting the art quilt. We have a range of global, regional, and local exhibitions, of which Wild is one, and it's wildly successful. This is how SAQA shows the world the range of work that's now done in the art quilt world. We also have a program that's in along with 4 other organizations called Textile Talks. And that's every Wednesday at 1 p.m., I believe, Eastern time, where all of these organizations pick from shows or artists or panels and what have you, and gives a very broad taste of everything that's going on that's new in the textile world. So if you have a chance, and that's open to anybody, you don't have to be a SAQA member to do that, okay? As far as community, we have regions, as I said, we have local connections, we have conferences. COVID made us all virtual, but upcoming, we have our fingers crossed that for 2023, we'll be having a live conference in Toronto, fingers crossed. And as far as education for our members, we have topical seminars, special interest groups, Facebook groups. All it takes, we're a volunteer-based organization, and all it takes is you got the interest and you've got the time, you can get something going within SAQA. Okay. And I said that we have currently, there are 19 global exhibitions going around the world right now, as well as 5 in the pipeline coming up. There are 22 current regional exhibitions, of which Wild is one, and I stopped counting how many of those are in the pipeline. A lot. We're coming back. Our biggest event of the year is the SAQA benefit auction. You want to see some pretty experimental, wonderful work, all in the 12 by 12 inch format. You can go to this website, SAQA.com events, a benefit auction. You can see the over 400 12 by 12 pieces that have been submitted by SAQA members all over the globe, and just get a taste of the variety of work that's done. I'm told people like to see other people's work. No, what a surprise. This is my latest series of works, an excerpt from my latest series of works, Galaxy. Alana mentioned it. This has been my passion for the last 6 years working in this series. As you can see, both 2D, large format, and small format. I love the high contrast. I love that feeling of open space. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. In juring or co-juring this show, I was really amazed at the breadth and depth of the work that was presented. but there still were themes that came through. And as I wrote in my juror's statement, really, I got a sense of this region and what's important to this region in terms of wild, open space, wild animals, wildfires came through very, very strongly. And so many ways that these were represented. It was really a challenge to come up with the best because they were all great. But we had a great time talking, discussing art, and coming up with what I hope is a cohesive show that many people can enjoy. So thank you for the opportunity to jury. And I hand it back to you, Alana.
Thank you so much, Delores. And I'm the moderator tonight. I'm not going to go too much into my experience jurying, but working with you and with Petra was truly a delight. One of the highlights of my year and of my time here, to be able to discuss art with the two of you and such wonderful art was a great experience. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here tonight.
Okay.
And next, I will move us on to, we have Deb Schultz. Deb's professional career was as a structural engineer. She sold her business in 2010 and retired early to start a new life in Jackson, Wyoming. She has been quilting for roughly 40 years and has participated in local and regional quilt shows with numerous first place ribbons and best of show or best of class honors. Highlights of her resume also include participation and awards in fabric line challenges, including Studio E Peppered Cotton, Cherrywood Hand-Dyed Fabrics, Hoffman Fabric Mastery Challenge, Moda Fabric Grunge Contest, and Free Spirit Cafe Facet Artisan Challenge, as well as multiple Mancuso quilt festivals. She has been successfully juried into American Quilter Society, Quilt Week, Paducah, Kentucky, and the International Quilt Festival, Quilts Inc., Houston, Texas, and has had a quilt selected for display at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky, and of course has a piece in Wild. So Deb, I will hand it off to you now.
Hello, thanks for inviting me to speak. I'm coming to you from Pinedale, Wyoming. Pinedale is a small town, 2,200 people, very rural. I did retire to Jackson, and then when my husband retired, we moved to Pinedale. I've been here for 8 or 9 years. Pinedale is situated between the Wyoming Range on the west and the Wind River Range on the east. And when you live in a small community like this, you have to embrace the activities of the community. And so I've taken up backpacking, and that's my second love next to quilting. I get in hundreds of miles each summer. I've gone all over the trails. You have to understand here that the summer season for backpacking is between the middle of July to the middle of September. So in 6 or 8 weeks, I try to get in major trips. I've had 4 major trips already this year, and I came out on Sunday for my last trip. So I don't do a lot of quilting in the summer, but I do spend a lot of time with nature, and being out in the wild is really important to me, and it's soul lifting. And even though my work doesn't reflect a lot of that, it moves me. My primary love, of course, is quilting. I've been quilting, as Alana said, for 40 years. I started with my first class in Denver, Colorado, Quilts in the Attic, which is now, I believe, part of Holly's. I was taught by strong women, I believe. I have good skills at hand piecing, hand quilting, and hand applique. I've lived through the era when we moved from cardboard templates to plastic templates, moved from rotary cutters, rulers, and our personal private measurements that Mary Ellen Hopkins taught us. And now we do everything at a 1/4 inch, unless we're doing something that's totally unique. But I watched all those changes. I watched the changes from the flat calicos in color and the dull colors and the 100 greens that I worked in my first few projects to what we see nowadays with the bright colors of Tula Pink and K-Facet. And I love the bright colors, and I love geometry. from the other part of my life is, as what Alana mentioned, is that I was a structural engineer. And so being a structural engineer, if you don't know, it's the framework, the skeleton of buildings, bridges, tanks. And so a lot of the work is done very detailed. And it also is something that pieces have to fit together. So it's important to have a 3D mind. And that's something you can't teach people. I've had a lot of engineers, you either have it or you don't have it. And I have a fairly good mind for those types of things. After quilting for about 10 or 15 years, you know, the first 10 or 15 years, you build this, you learn the skills, the basic skills, and then you start using other people's patterns and you work with their patterns. But after 10 or 15 years, you say, I've done this, now what do I do? And you start experimenting and working with 4-inch and 8-inch and 12-inch modules with the same block. But I was blessed at this time to live in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I discovered Front Range Contemporary Quilters in Denver. And I was one of those lucky people that joined that organization when there were only 80 or 90 people in the organization. I was a member for 8 or 10 years, and then I ended up moving on to other things. But they were very influential in the skills I learned. And I think in many ways I've done it all. I have painted, I have glued, I have dyed, I have fused, I have add metallics, I have put cheesecloth on things. And I've done a lot of workshops with the instructors of that era that were the best. Nancy Crow, Mickey Lawler, Sue Benner, Ann Johnston, Therese May. And it was very influential. And from my perspective, what I was doing all those years, trying it all out and building a toolbox so that I could hone the things that were important to me in the way I worked. And for me, there's nothing better in quilting than one of those moments where you go, oh my God, I did that. Aha, oh, I'm so excited. Or when you're totally working on something and you're in the zone and the rest of the world is just lost to you because you're so focused on what you're doing. So now I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you a little bit more about my work and walk you through my piece that's in Wild and help you understand how it developed and how very different it is from the work that I typically do. So let's hope the screen sharing goes well. So, and here we go. And we're going to back up one screen. So this is a little bit of the country that I live in. And I spent a lot of time out in the country. And I just wanted you to see a little bit about what Wyoming looks like. This is a picture of my studio. This is where we work. And like a lot of people, when you buy a long arm, you don't have a room big enough to it. And so this was an addition to our home that could be a future family room for somebody. And if you look ahead, you see my long arm. On my left is my sewing center. On my right is the cutting station. There's batting underneath the long arm. There's a station that batting is hanging from the wall on the right. On the very corner in the front is a little triangle that's gray. That's my big board for my ironing station. And to my right and left, if I'm standing in the corner of the room, are my design walls. And I have about 20 feet by 8 feet of design walls. And they're always covered as they are covered now. And I think it sometimes is helpful to see where people work. I have a closet to my right behind, and it's absolutely stuffed with unfinished projects I want to start, materials to make all those projects, and all the things that we need to do the work we do now. So this is my piece that's in the exhibit. This is Wild, or this is Rampage. And I'm sure you're wondering where the name Rampage came from. Rampage, I was wandering around the house one day. My husband was sitting in the living room and he was reading the magazine. And I said, oh, I need something new. And he holds up this magazine and he says, you should do this. And it was this picture. It was this photo. It was the centerfold of a magazine that is produced by the Wyoming Sheep Foundation called Rampage. I thought I should name this centerfold, but unless you knew where it came from, you probably wouldn't get it. So that's where the name came from, and that's where the project came from. This is how the project starts. This is a process that's, oh my goodness, Susan Carlson is famous for. As you can see, I've got a piece of muslin in the background. The photographer, I received permission to use the photo. He never gave me a color photo, but what he did provide for me was a 24 by 36 black and white image of it. And so I worked with that image, and I worked with the centerfold out of the magazine to develop this. And you can see you start with, I sketched the basic shapes, very few lines on the muslin. This is on a 2-inch thick rigid insulation, piece of rigid insulation. The muslin is held down because you can see there's lots of little pins on it, and that's what holds all the fabric in place. Nothing's fused. It's all just laying there loose, because you're going to build. The process is you start with bigger pieces and you build on top and you build on top. And so this was the development, the early development of the project. And here it is working further. And you can see the centerfold in the upper left, and you can see the large image behind that I'm working to. You can also see all the pins, all the fabric is still loose, and I'm building it. And down in the foreground, you can see a piece of foil to the left. There's a little bit of glue in there if I want to hold it. I'm sure I'm going to keep a place. I might stick a little bit of glue on it, put it on with my finger or a Q-tip once in a while. And then there's lots of scraps of fabric. And I basically worked out of my scrap tub, and any piece of fabric that I have that was orange and blue, or my friends had, because I borrowed a lot of fabric, I added pieces to this to develop it. And here's another image, and you can see there's in the upper left corner is the image that I received from the photographer. It's also in the right. This is kind of two photos together. One's in black and white to see how my value is going. And then in the lower right, I've actually finished the ram. I've cut the muslin away around the perimeter. And now I'm laying him on a background, and I'm auditioning backgrounds. And I'm not sure, I think I've got one more slide. Nope, up in this slide. On this slide, one of the things that Marianne and I discussed yesterday, or she noted, was that there's some tulle on this. You could put tulle over the whole thing, but if you look in the upper left, there's some shading, and there's some more shading that kind of falls out of that. And so I use the tulle as a shade, and I use green tulle, I use gold tulle, and I used a tulle that was a camouflage. And in the upper left, if you look at that tulle, you look at that area that's kind of spotty, it's because the tulle is dyed to look like camouflage. And once I got to this point, I glued down with my fingers almost all the pieces. I glued the tulle in place, and then it went to the long arm. And I quilted it. I tried to follow the fur patterns on his face and on his back. On the horns, I etched in some of the lines, the fractures that end up on the horns. And the background is just a free motion of circles, which if I could go back and I could take all of those out, I would probably use something a little bit different. But here's another image of it just so you can see it. And you can see I've got a little bit of stippling over here, some circles over here, and over on the horns, you can see a little bit more of the detail. It's a labor of love. But this is not my normal type of work. This is not the thing that draws Deb in. I try to get my projects finished. I finished this one. It seemed to be a perfect one for this exhibit. I submitted it and was thankfully accepted. But the type of work I prefer is this type of work. And I know this looks like this is just a pieced project, and you have to apologize for some of the quality of the photos, because these are older pieces. But it's a body of work that I've done. And these are kaleidoscope quilts that are put together with 1230-degree points that come together. And they're very fussy to piece, and they're very challenging to piece. And this is the first one where I'm playing with colors and trying to get the points on the outside all about the same size, and work in some polka dots and work in some lines and see what happens. And then I go to another one, and you can see it's in progress. It's asymmetrical now. And I've spent a lot of time on the quilting, focusing on it. And I'm using some ombre fabrics, still using some stripes and some pieces. And I've worked some circles into it now. And then I keep going another one. And this was for the grunge challenge that Alana mentioned. And this is all grunge fabric. Grunge happens to be one of the fabrics I like. But all of these little circles that are put on here are all quilted by hand. And if you look at the center where the copper is, there's some very, very fine handwork there. This is the kind of stuff to get this to piece and to fit together well and get all of those 12 points that come together in the middle. It's a real skill builder. And this is the kind of stuff I really love to do. People don't. I do. And we all have to pick what makes us happy. And I zone out on this. Here's my current piece. This is another level. You just keep developing in your growth in doing work. This has 24 wedges that come together. That Y seam to 12 wedges on the outer. There's lots of curved seams. There's applique on top of it. And there's some ombre fabrics again, trying to get the points and trying to get some movement and color. And here's some detail work that comes from that. Again, lots and lots of fine quilting and fine detail work, which is the type of stuff I love. All of these kinds of kaleidoscope quilts are built with strip sets. So I've taken that to a next level, and this is some more strip sets. This are the same strip sets put together, and they're cut at 45 degrees and put around a vertical line, symmetrical about vertical line. This was first, at least for the first time I saw it, was a concept by Irene Rodek. And so she gets the credit. And the picture on the right is the entire quilt. The colors are a little muted because it's got an incandescent light above it. But the picture on the left where the long arm is, the colors are more representative. And it is, again, I love textural quilting. I love straight line quilting, and I love straight lines. And this was probably had one too many colors in this particular quilt, in my opinion. But I love the quilt. I love the work, and it's very challenging to put together. You build all these triangles and squares and strips, and you have to try to fit it in. It's nobody else's pattern. My current work is circles. As you can see, I've moved from lines and into circles. And the image on the left, the black and white image, I journal, and I try to journal most days. And I'm a great doodler, and I'm always doodling. And so that image is a 3x3 image of some doodling that I blew up. I think it's probably 18 by 18 there. And then I built the quilt that goes with it. And this is the quilt in progress. All of those circles are pieced in. None of them are appliqued over the top. And if you look closely, you can see that some of the piecing is not as straight as I would like in the very center, but it lays pretty flat, and it's hard to put big circles in a quilt. This thing is about 60 inches by 60 inches. Here is it developed. Oops, I went too far. Here's the final quilt on the left. And I didn't have a great phone then. I had to use an older phone, so I don't have a better image. But you can see I've added, after I got all the circles done, then I went in and I added I used Karen K. Buckley method she does for biased stems. And all of those fine lines she makes them 12 inches long, 18 inches long. I made 20 and 30 feet of biased stems. And then I added it over the top of the circles to add some texture and added some more lines around it. And then I did some additional stitching, which you can see that's the triple stitch that you get with the Bernina on the right. And then here's a little bit, another image where the light's hitting it. So once again, you can see all the circles, and you can see that I've done little tiny circles and fill work. Obviously, that's something I love. And I've done lots of straight circles. So I'm going to stop sharing, and that's kind of me and the work I do and what I love. And thank you. And I guess I'll pass it back to you, Alana.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you for sharing all of those. I can't wait to kind of get to some of the questions and comments and kind of dig into your process. That was really great. We're going to move on to our next artist on today's panel, who is Claudia Sheehen. Claudia was born in Stuttgart, Germany, and immigrated to the US as a little girl with her parents. Living just 45-minute bus ride from Manhattan, she took advantage of New York City's art museum opportunities as a teen. She initially learned textile techniques from her mother and later taught herself to quilt as a hobby. She became more interested in quilting as a serious art form when the modern quilting trend became prominent. Since then, her further investigation into fiber art techniques such as fabric dyeing and textile manipulation has fostered a renewed interest in the experimentation process. For Claudia, the act of experimenting with cloth, thread, and fibers is her creative expression. She is just setting out into the creative textile arts world. One could say she is embarking on a third career after working in research as a microbiologist and then in medicine as a physician assistant. She has exercised her left brain enough and now wants to give the right brain a chance. Since she is just beginning this new textile art endeavor, she does not have a large body of work, but she has had the opportunity to exhibit pieces in 2 local Boulder, Colorado quilt shows and now in Wild. She is planning on submitting work more regularly, she says, if she can stop wasting time watching others create on YouTube and Instagram, which I insist is never a waste of time. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to start to share my screen. So bear with me here as I get this all started out. Okay. First of all, I'm really, really honored to be part of this panel discussion and that my quilt was selected for this exhibition. I have to say that I was very, very surprised, to be honest. One of the most iconic events, I think, that happens in the West is a wildfire. And a fire became very, very personal to me. A forest fire threatened my home in 2020, and the fire extended just 0.25 miles from my house. This is actually a picture of the aftermath of the fire, and it's, I mean, in very short walking distance from where I live. And what is so startling to me is how charred the earth was, and that there was really nothing alive, nothing was left. Although I've never been in the midst of a forest fire, this is really just my interpretation of such an event. I initially felt that my inexperience in visual depiction was showing through by some of the feedback I've received about how people view my quilt. And I find that people are a bit confused as to what's happening in this depiction. Questions are, is the fire receding? Yes, it is. The name of the quilt is The Fire Passes. The tree in the foreground is, which is on the left, is that what's left, or is that just a tree that's in front of the fire? Why is it made of cording? Where is the horizon? And initially, I felt that it was just because I'm not well trained in the arts. I have very little training, formal training in arts. And so I was feeling a little defensive, but actually, I think my interpretation came through quite well in the end, because on a subconscious level, I feel that one cannot always make sense of the confusion when there's such an uncontrollable event happening around them. I just want to point out the geometric shape of the ground. I found that was very interesting after seeing the aftermath of the fire. When all the vegetation is burned and there's only cinder and char, you see that the rock is actually very crystalline, no doubt due to the processes of geologic formation that happened when our Rocky Mountains came into being. As I said, I've never been really this close to a fire, but as I understand, when the fire comes upon one, it happens very fast. And this is something I try to evoke in this quilt, in that I primarily used improvisation in when I appliqued the fabrics onto the quilt. I wanted the flames to appear organic. And the way I did this is I studied pictures of wildfires, and it always struck me how the center of the fire is bright white and yellow, and then the outer edges of the fire become darker red and orange. Here's just a close-up of a part of my quilt, and you can see that I sewed on the cording. I covered cord of the to signify the branches and the trunk of the tree, and I'll explain why I did that a little bit later. Here's some other close-up pictures of the quilt. The materials I used are hand-dyed silk gauze. I purchased silk and rayon fabric. I had some silk georgette and cotton fabrics. I did minimal fusing because most of this was quite spontaneous with the way I placed the fabrics onto the backing. And I chose to use gauze, which I dyed lightly to try to create a watercolor effect. And I think in some places I was quite successful, where you can see the bleed through of a darker color over another color. And I wanted to do that to give the impression of movement. Flames, of course, have movement. This was my first attempt and experience in actually fabric dyeing. This is my studio, and it's kind of a wonky picture of my studio because I used the panorama setting on my phone. No, I do not overburden my sewing side table so that it's going to break off. And it's not quite as wide, and I also don't have a divot in my sewing room like that. My sewing room is also our guest bedroom, so it's tidy right now because we have just finished entertaining a guest, and I'm moving back in. Some of my other pieces is really are just experiments. Now, as we grow older and time seems to move faster, I think as children, time seems to move more slowly because we're so occupied in learning and experiencing new things every day. To slow time down, one must find new experiences and engagements. And that's what textile arts is doing for me. There are so many aspects of this art form, and that they are new and exciting and that I've not experienced. And it is just a very exciting period in my life to experience something so very different from any of my other vocations that I've had in the past. Initially, as I said, as Alana mentioned, I'm a self-taught quilter. And I had very traditional ideas about quilting, and I focused very much on the utilitarian aspect of it. Quilts were blankets, period. But the modern quilt movement changed that perspective for me, especially with the improvisation. Improvisation equals experimentation, and that really appeals to me as a former scientist. So this quilt, these are some close-ups of this quilt. Initially, as you saw, it was very block-based, but each block was improvisationally pieced. And I tried out different things like sewing curves together. This here is insert piecing. So there was some experimentation with that, putting together colors in different ways, just exploring things. And then after I pieced and put the blocks together, the quilt sat, and it sat, and it sat, and it sat. And I really did not know how to even go about quilting it. Not that I was particularly good at quilting either. But what I finally found is that I did not want to quilt this quilt with just straight line quilting. To me, that was such a pedestrian solution. So what did I decide to do? I decided to use it as a quilt sampler. It gave me an opportunity to quilt, free motion quilt, and to do it with a large piece of fabric or a large quilt rather than just a small square, to really hone my coordination skills. And what I found was that in doing so, I was able to, first of all, get better at quilting, but also I discovered quilting motifs. And at this point in my life, I found that I was very much drawn to the Japanese sashiko embroidery patterns. So you can see that there's some sashiko kind of motifs here and here and here, and even the step pattern is a sashiko motif. So it was, again, experimenting and exploring for me. And that's basically what quilting is for me. It's just experimentation at this point. Something else that I've just discovered and I'm getting very excited about is fabric manipulation. And this is a quilt sampler I made for myself, manipulating fabric. Something that I'm very interested in is basically bringing fabric away from the plane of the quilt. And that it adds a lot of new challenges. And that's one of the reasons I use cording to make the tree in the Fire Passes quilt. I wanted to just bring a little bit of bas relief to the quilt. In this quilt, which is really a pastiche of many different fabric manipulation techniques, such as pleating and pin tucking. Here are some close-ups. I also am very interested in origami. I enjoy doing origami and trying to find ways of incorporating that to bring more texture and a little bit more elevation to a quilt. This quilt also was an experiment using what's the term? Variegated threads. And because I find that is a very difficult thread to use, and I wanted to see what a variegated thread would do on just a solid background. Some of my other experiments have been with embroidery. This is an ordination stole that I made for my niece, who became a celebrant in the United Kingdom. Initially, I was very prejudiced against using modern materials like fusibles, paints. I just felt it was cheating. And the same went for using technology, just such as an embroidery machine. So why did I buy an embroidery machine? Well, yeah, you just sometimes do things. And I found that like stitching out patterns that somebody else had digitized was just cheating. But I don't think that anymore, because you can always select sections of a pattern or a previously designed motif and make it your own. This particular example is really my foray into digitizing my own embroidery pattern. And I embroidered, I digitized these small flowers and the leaves, but then decided to add couching with embroidery thread onto the stole to give it, again, a little bit more texture. And also it gave me a little bit more control, because the design is actually, it does actually match and is continuous, but again, it's also asymmetric. So there were some real challenges in planning the design on this garment. So technology, I've realized, can be your friend. And I've learned to use Adobe Illustrator to design my embroidery motifs. I've learned, used the Illustrator to draft my my quilt patterns or my piecing patterns. And I no longer find that using those kinds of tools is cheating. You don't just need to use a rotary cutter and a ruler. You can exploit anything. And in fact, I have decided, I've learned to use the laser cutter at our local library to cut very precisely curved piecings that can be very difficult sometimes to piece together unless you're very, very accurate. So this is just, I wanted to end my presentation on a little bit happier note, because the quilt that I made was an expression of anxiety, essentially. This is the picture of the same rock outcropping that you saw in the previous photograph of the charred earth. And I want you to see that life is beginning again, and it's becoming green. Yes, the trees are down and they've been harvested, but things are growing again. And we're even getting small trees coming back. So the forest is returning. I think what is important here is to know that even though we constantly depress ourselves about how the climate is changing, the earth still heals. There's also there, you know, I was thinking that I don't really have a lot of pictures of me in the wild. I don't backpack miles and miles in 6 weeks, but there's another way of defining wild. And as Delores mentioned, wild can have many connotations in the English language. And one of them is being foolhardy, or harebrained. And that's my version of wild. Is I just completed an insane bucket list ambition of mine by biking a century. It wasn't just only 100-mile distance, but actually there was an elevation gain of 6,000 feet on this bike route. And my husband was my support team, and I made sure that he was there in case he had to scrape me off the pavement, but he didn't. He just was able to bring me iced coffee and a sandwich at one point, which was very much appreciated. And finally, I just wanted to say that I live in what's called the urban-rural interface. And that sometimes it feels like I'm really completely in the wild, as it is undomesticated, especially when you come face to face with a moose in your backyard. Actually, the moose was looking in the window of my basement, and I'm not that insanely wild to come face to face with a moose just inches away. But I hope that you will follow me with my quilt experiments and my adventures at Left Brain Designs. And I thank you very much for allowing me to present to you today. And I will stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for sharing that. And kind of everybody has a different kind of journey towards art quilting, and yours is very interesting. And so we really appreciate you sharing that. We've got some good comments for you too coming through. But first, we're going to round out our wonderful panel with Cynthia Jarest. Cynthia, or Cindy, spent most of her life as a maker in Denver, Colorado. She has always loved and still loves making things. Dabbling in macrame, beading, painting, and even pottery, fiber came into her life in her early 20s when she made a baby quilt for a friend, and then she did not make another quilt for many years as other life experiences took over. Graduating from Metropolitan State University with a degree in marketing, she worked in the media department for several advertising agencies. When she became a mother, she knew she needed something artsy to do, and so began her journey of quilt making, which grew into fiber art and then the wonderful addition of mixed media. Cindy has grown with every new class, new media, and new experience, reaching beyond her knowledge base and stepping outside her comfort zone and enjoying every minute of the creative process. Her art evolved and she received awards on several fiber and mixed media pieces. Currently, she shows with galleries along the Colorado Front Range. Cindy is a member of SAQA, Front Range Contemporary Quilters, and the Rocky Mountain Quilt Museum. Cindy?
Hi, and I want to thank you, Alana, and the Brigham City Museum for having this forum and an opportunity to speak. It was a thrilling and also terrifying to be a part of this. But I'm going to start. I'll just try to start with the screen share, and hopefully this will work. I don't backpack. I don't want to sleep out in a tent, but I do hike an awful lot. This is a core group of women that we started about 10 to 12 strong, and over the years people have faded away, but we continue to hike. It's almost weekly in some form or fashion. So, and I also this is a picture of a group with the Colorado Mountain Club. I ended up joining them as our group dwindled and we couldn't get our schedules together. So we weren't necessarily hiking all that often there for a period. So I joined the Colorado Mountain Club, and they offer all kinds of outdoor adventures. So I love to take pictures, and that's where I find a lot of my inspiration, and a lot of my work comes from those photos. And they don't even have to be good photos. They just need to inspire me. I like to bump up all the colors when I create artwork. I'm going to show you my studio. It's kind of clean. That's one section. I have to share my space with my husband. So he has half of this attic space and I have half. So I'm pretty crowded in my studio space. That's one area. This is looking at, well, where I'm sitting right now, and that's basically my design wall. It's handmade. It's not very big. I don't have a big wall. That's actually a piece hanging there that I just finished. And then this is most of my storage. So I have bins full of fabric, paint, jelly plates. I have pencils, pens, all kinds of art materials that I end up using in my work. And this is just a photo of something that I created based off of a photo after a hike to Herman Gulch. And this has been in a couple of shows and it actually sold. So I no longer have that piece, but it's something that I thoroughly enjoy making, this type of quilt art piece. And this is another one. And I think this was probably a hike along Longs Lake, which is part of the Brainerd Lakes area in Colorado. When in July, you just get massive amounts of spring flowers. So depending on the elevation and temperatures, the Indian paintbrush can be anywhere from a light pale salmon to a vibrant pink to a red. And that will take me to, this is my current piece that is at Brigham City. And this is part of my lunar series. And it is titled Flora and Fauna. And I create this piece. This is how I start. So I have canvas. I have canvas at the top. This is painted canvas. That's also canvas that I wrote on. This is piece of silk. I put staples in and rusted, let it rust for several days. Muslin. This is paper. So it comes from a big giant sheet of paper that I've torn down, and it actually has leaf prints embedded into that paper. And I didn't end up using all of these, so these are just pinned up. This is an eco-dyed piece of, I think it's just cotton that has thread stitching in it. This was velvet that I did not use, and this is also a eco-dyed piece of cotton fabric. Then I start to play with some of the embellishments or pieces that I'm going to put together. The moons that are across the top are just little paper cutouts. I put a cougar face in the leaves, and he's sketched out on tissue paper. You can see two samples. I had two samples of different faces and ended up choosing the one that is currently there now. Took out the velvet, and now I've painted it. So I use two colors and they blend together. And then the rest of the time is just finding elements that I think will fit the motif of what do I see as wild when I'm hiking in the mountains. I love the moon. I love the cougar hiding in the background. I love this plant is called the monument plant, and it grows up to almost as tall as I am, about 5 feet to 5.5 feet. And it only blooms once every 100 years. And I had to confirm that with two friends that are, one is a botanist and the other one just really loves plants. And it's true. It's a pretty amazing plant, and you can find it. And they have these gorgeous little pale white and green flowers on it. And it's the story of it is amazing to me. As I continue, I've painted the background. Well, I have stitched them all together. I use a monofilament to stitch the pieces together. I will go back over and then hand stitch. So I got big hand stitching and crosses and some ricing just to give it a very rough, natural kind of feel. And then I scrape white paint over the top of it just to lighten it up. Then I start playing with my different elements, the trees, the birds are a stamp that I carved. The aspens that you see here, not quite all the way finished. I paint or I shibori dye. And then once I'm sure where I want the placement, they will become a permanent fixture. And I use fusible web, one of my favorite things. And moose tracks or deer tracks. I think they're deer tracks. That's a stamp I carved as well. And as we get to the end where the piece is pretty much finished, this is what it looks like for the most part. I've got elements there that I feel represent what I find in the wild. We have coyotes and wolves. We have mountain lions. I didn't really do anything with the bears. The very bottom, there are bird tracks. I don't know if you can see that. Again, that's a stamp that I hand carved. My pine trees are just cheesecloth that I have hand dyed and stretched and manipulated into the form of pine trees. And I believe the last one, this isn't second to last because I do have a mushroom. Because you can go mushrooming at certain times of the year in the Colorado Rockies. And I think that's the end of my presentation. So I will stop screen sharing and hand it back to you, Alana.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I've seen your slides already earlier and just how that piece came together. I just find infinitely fascinating. So thank you for sharing that with everybody. One last, while we're going around, we do have Teresa Ely with us. And Teresa, if you're ready, would you like to take a moment to promote the SAQA, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming region. I am sure people want to know how they can find out more about your events, how to get involved. Pass it on to you for a quick plug.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. As Alana said, I'm Teresa. I also go by Tree, a nickname from high school and college. I am one of 2 co-reps for Colorado, Utah, Wyoming. My other co-rep is Susan Jarest out of Boulder. I'm in Western Colorado, either in Montrose or Gunnison. We help each other out and share the load with serving as regional reps. It's a very rewarding position. There are approximately 125 members that are located in the 3 states. And then in SAQA, when you join, you automatically become a member of the locality that you live in, but you can also pick a second region, maybe the part of the world you grew up, maybe where you have relatives, et cetera, et cetera. So we have about 50 second region members. So some of our major activities are that we have 3 local connections, and these are groups that meet monthly. Mostly they have been meeting via Zoom, but recently they have reconnected in person. Probably the exception is our Wyoming local connections. For those of you that know the length and width of that state, Wyoming is quite large, so they are still meeting via Zoom. And any SAQA member can participate in these local connections as part of the region. Another activity is our monthly newsletter, trying to keep people aware of upcoming events and opportunities to compete, and then also to share our successes with regards to what our members have been accomplishing. We also have regional Zoom meetings 4 times a year, and we use this as an opportunity to educate and network. And so we've had primarily the education occurring from our local members, our regional members, which I think is great. In some cases, it gives them an opportunity to present on a topic that they've never presented on. You know, maybe they're scientists that have turned into artists. I'm also one of those, like some of the other members on this call. So we do that via our Zoom meetings. And then regional exhibitions, the reason we're here. Basically, probably within about a 10-year period, we'll have 2 to 4 regional exhibitions within that time period. Generally, regional reps do not stay in that position, that volunteer position, for 10 years. So it's kind of transitional with regards to the regional exhibitions. And speaking of wild, wow, this has been a fabulous presentation, and we have more Q&A to come. A special thank you, a number of special thank yous. One to our exhibition committee, a lovely group of 13 gals who basically came together last spring of 2021, and looked at and developed the theme, talked about venues, and that we wanted as much as possible 3-state representation in these venues, and moved it forward and basically took on the task so that Susan and I became more leaders or chairs, and we had a lot of scouts working for us, which has been fabulous. Another big thank you, kind of in the order of how things work, is to our 3 jurors, Petra, Delores, and Alana. And as co-jurors or tri-jurors, they had the challenging task of first individually basically noting and rating the pieces, but then they had to come together as a team and then reevaluate and decide which pieces they would choose. So they chose 30 beautiful pieces, and we had 49 artists competing. And the cool thing is our regional committee really wanted to make it available to not only folks that had competed previously or that competed really well at the global level, but we wanted to make sure there were opportunities for perhaps new artists, new members of SAQA to be exhibited. And so to do that, basically we limited it to where each artist could submit multiple pieces, but only one piece could be chosen, which made it challenging, as Alana and Delores can indicate. Thank you also to Brigham City. Wow, they just opened their doors to us and decided they would be our premier location. And we were very fortunate to have our last regional exhibition there. And as a result, they knew what it took to put together an art quilt show. And yeah, we did have some hiccups and some last minute quilts showing up. And, you know, that's part of the process, right, Alana? And thank you to the artists. Without the artwork and without your participation and without helping us fundraising for this event, Wild wouldn't have been possible. In that regard, I wanted to point out that one of our committee members has done a fabulous job creating a catalog. And right now, Brigham City has these catalogs available for purchase. And Alana, you're willing to ship them to folks, correct? Okay, so you can look up the phone number on the web and give them a call, and they'd be glad to mail it to you. And that way we help out our sister museums that are supporting us. And then, yeah, so that's the plug for the catalog. And then I will close with basically talking about the next venues. Because we had such a large committee working on this, we actually we're blessed with multiple venues for this show. And so our next venue will be in Greenwood Village, Colorado, which is kind of southeast Denver. That will be in January through February of 2023. And Claudia and another member of our exhibition committee will actually be teaching an educational component associated with that. So you can get some more details from the newsletter on that. As a Gunnison local, Gunnison, Colorado, we will be hosting the show in August of 2023. And we are currently negotiating with Grand Junction, Colorado for September of 2023 and Rocky Mountain Quilt Museum for fall of 2024 into early winter of 2025. We have a few different venues that we have yet to finalize opportunities with, but we are very happy each venue will be able to portray, display, give a little different take on Wild, and yet each venue is also allowing us different opportunities to engage with the community, to allow for education opportunities and to promote our members as well as the art quilt. So thank you so much. And wow, a special round of applause to Brigham City for pulling off just a phenomenal Zoom call for us and artist review.
Thank you so much, Tree. It's very much our pleasure and our honor to have you all tonight. And so exciting about all the venues. So I'm going to have to get that list written down from you because I think that's more even than the last time I heard. And if I can, I'd like to go see it everywhere it goes. So that's really wonderful and a credit to your committee and how active the Colorado, Utah, Wyoming region is. So this is now, I'm going to tell the people in the chat, you only have a few more minutes to get your questions in. I'm going to move on to some of the questions. Like we get the same questions in the gallery pretty regularly. So I am going to lead our panel off with the hardest question to answer and the one that we get asked the most, which is, how long does it take you to complete a piece? Whoever wants to take that on first.
I'll take it on. It all depends. It all depends. When you have a deadline, you will complete that piece by that deadline. Other pieces, like my pieced block quilt, that was years because I just didn't know where to go with that. So it very much depends. I think it also depends on each artist and all of the different methods that they use. I'm sure Deb Schultz with her very intricate piecing, it takes a long, long time to make sure that every corner, every point matches. For somebody like me who's slapping on vibrant fabrics onto a background, you know, my piece took me about 6 weeks to do, and that was only just sort of the working time. The emotional portion of it probably took a lot longer than that, because it takes a while to recuperate and think, oh my gosh, I could have lost my home. And that was in 2020. So, you know, it all depends.
I'll respond to that. And I think a lot of times for me, it has to gel in my mind. I mean, if you're talking about the kaleidoscope or the circle work, I mean, it still takes a long time to gel, even though you think there's a pattern there, there's not. And so it takes me a long time. I spend, and I'll wake up, I'll have one of those moments, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and go, that's what I should do. And I know the answer, and then I do that step, and then I have to wait for that next moment. So I work on a lot of projects at once, and I do a lot of handwork. And so I'm working on handwork almost every night. That keeps my soul going, that keeps me busy. But in the back of the mind are the other projects and the other things I need to sort out. So there's no way you can put a number on it. It takes forever, but they do get done. That's always my goal. Cynthia?
For me, it's, again, it is hard to say. I tried to keep track of hours at some point, but it's when you're tracking your time, it's when you've already maybe had your idea, or there was a photo that inspired you, or some insight that you found in the middle of the night. But a lot of times the fabrics that I'm using, I've spent over the last 5-10 years hand dyeing or eco dyeing. So how does that time play into the end of the finished project? It's really hard to determine that, because, you know, there was a period where I was doing a lot of eco dyeing, and then there was a period where I was dyeing. I called it bag dyeing because I don't have a big wet studio space. So I would make my dyes, I'd get everything ready, and then I'd put them in bags, and then they sit there for a while, and then you've got to rinse them a million times before you can actually wash them and dry them and iron them. So that's very time consuming. So how does that play into the piece that I'm going to use that's this big out of a yard of fabric that I dyed to put into a piece? So it's very difficult to figure it out. And I can work on something for 3 months and not have it quite finished yet. And then other things I can zip through, well, I'll say maybe 2 months.
Delores, can I ask you to share what you said on that yesterday? Because I thought it was just perfect.
Yes.
What I said was it takes a lifetime. Because to me, when you're making art, you're bringing all of you and all of your experience and all of your knowledge. And I think I mentioned knowing who you can go to when you run out of the particular thread, and who you can depend on to give you a critical eye. And, you know, these all go into making the piece that's right in front of you. But if we thought about that as artists, we'd never start anything. You do it because you love it, and you hope that someday you'll finish it and it'll be close to what it is you imagined.
Thank you. Yeah, and when we're talking in the gallery and people ask that question, that's usually, you know, we say, well, how many 3 a.m.s are you talking about? Scheming. And so, yeah, I think people want to know a quantity, but it's not really a quantitative kind of answer. But that actually leads me into another question, because I promise our audience that this is entirely coincidental, but I imagine they noticed how many of you come from such strong STEM backgrounds. Deb, you even talk about it in your artist statement, and you spoke about it plenty tonight, but I think that's just something I want to explore is what do you think science brings to your art, or maybe how art helps you with your scientific pursuits? Again, anyone can jump in on that.
I'm here. I think that's a tough question. You know, I after I'd practiced for 30 years and then retired, and I'd done quilting along, but I really wanted to work the other side of my brain. And so I went through a lot of exercises to free up and try to just do stuff loosely. And I did a lot of that, but I find myself going right back to that fine detail work. So, and that's where I'm at. And I'm thankful for my brain, that's for sure. Other thoughts?
I was interviewed for an article about just that subject. And I guess I've always done my science and my art in parallel. And so, you know, I made my living out of doing science. And I did it for 37 years because I enjoyed doing science, but I also at the same time was doing art in some manifestation. And I know very creative scientists, and I know very scientific artists. So, you know, it's so individual. When I started quilting, the last thing I wanted to do was to include my science into it. And I still don't include my technical work, but here I am doing galaxies and taking astronomy courses, and because bottom line, it's what interests me right now.
I think for me, as I said in my presentation, it's sometimes, especially when I was in research in microbiology, it is a little bit of playing in the lab. And yeah, there is the scientific method where you're asking a question and you want to test that question in a certain way and so forth. But sometimes you just have to sort of sit back and say, okay, you know, what if I put this bacteria on this media? Or how can I find a bacterium that might be eating this particular compound that we want to be able to get rid of in a waste stream? And I won't go into big detail here, but you start playing a little bit. And I think a lot of art, some of the creative process, not all of it. I mean, journaling is very structured, I think, but art and even science, sometimes there's a sort of play mode to it. And they're not necessarily always separate. That's, I guess, the way I look at it.
I think that there's the what if I question that's common.
Well, and to me, it seems obvious you're all people who are passionate and pursue your passions. So maybe it's a little bit of that, the curiosity, the creativity, all of those things come together. I just found that so interesting. And as the Brigham City Museum of Art and History has a sister museum that's also natural history. So again, we didn't do it on purpose, but we try constantly to blend all of the different ideas of creativity and how, you know, especially young folks, but anyone in our audience can kind of find inspiration in what they're not expecting. So thank you for those answers, because you didn't even know what a big favor you were doing to me and to my audience, and by kind of sharing those reflections. So I'm going to pull, we're running out of time. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'll tell you, you should go look at Facebook after the fact. A lot of compliments in the comments, and I won't share all of those today, but it's been really lovely. And trying to get a few questions out of folks, and we did get one. So Claudia, this one is for you. A lot of people talking about how your perspective did come through, and some of the, answering some of the questions that we had passed along that people asked. And so then in follow up to that, Lynn wanted to know, do you feel that being in the show has given you more confidence to create and to pursue exhibiting in the future?
Yes, it has. It has. I think it's shown me that I do have something to offer. And I need to let myself go a little bit more. And then I kind of did that in that quilt. Yeah, it's a very freeing experience, and I want to enjoy that again and again and again. So yes.
That's wonderful. And so kind of more broadly to all of you, what do you think kind of the benefit of being involved? Because some of the folks in our audience maybe have quilted their whole lives and didn't know that guilds like this exist, or haven't really, decided to take that dive. So what does, being a part of SAQA, being a part of the region, just guilds, artist guilds in general, what has that really, what does that mean to you, and what has that done for you?
I'll pipe in because I'm unmuted first. For me, I think it has just been, sometimes I'm a little overwhelmed by SAQA, to be honest, because there are so many ideas and so many techniques. And there are times when I just want to do it all. But that's what it means to me. It's sort of the excitement of all of these creative ideas coming together. That's I think what I get most out of SAQA.
I'll jump in next. It's the inspiration. I love to see other people's work. And then I go, what if I try that? But it's also having a critical eye, having a good group around you that helps you sort out what the strength of a piece is, or have you thought about this, to help me focus. And then, as Delores said, who's got the thread I need? Who's got that fabric I need that you're willing to share? And I don't know a quilter that isn't willing to share. So it's a big society, and it's a warm society, and it's one I really, really get a lot out of.
So I too find a lot of inspiration, and I love looking at other artists and just wondering, how did they do that? And I think as fiber artists, there are so many people that are willing to teach you, to share their ideas, to share their experiences that I don't know that other art forms necessarily have. But it's a very warm, embracing group and forum. And SAQA has so many opportunities to view other artists, to read about other artists. They go into details about licensing and copyright, so you get that information as well. And that's globally. And then you also have the opportunity to reach people regionally and even locally. So it's a very supportive and fun, interesting group of people.
I would say one of the things about SAQA that people don't appreciate is that it's for people at every level of development and interest in the art quilt, broadly defined. I've heard many people say, oh, I'm not ready for SAQA. If you have an interest, you're ready for SAQA. It's a very supportive community. That's been said over and over again. We've got lots and lots and lots of resources, as I mentioned earlier with the website. You could research everything, and now we have a searchable website so that you can, plug in what it is you want to find out more about. We've got a journal, we've got a magazine, but mostly we've got great people and great volunteers. And that feeling of people get you. And that there's nothing that if you can think about it, somebody will have a thought about how you might be able to get there. And that feeling of community, and we're a volunteer organization, even though we've got more than 4,000 people. We only have 5 paid staffs total. Everything else we do, all the committees, all the programs are all volunteer run. So it's another way, another growth mechanism. I never saw myself as a vice president of SAQA. Here I am, right? So community and opportunity, that's what SAQA is about, focused on the art quilt.
That's perfect. Thank you all so much. I hope that inspired some people watching to go ahead and, click that button and pay their dues and get involved in what has been a wonderful community that I've been excited to get to know over the last few years. So thank you for sharing that. And I just want to thank you again, all of our artists here tonight, so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. I want to thank those of you who joined us via Facebook Live. If you missed any part of this or would like to watch the recording, it will be available on the Brigham City Museum's Facebook, YouTube, and web pages. Feel free to share it out. If you're watching this recording after the fact, you can still feel free to add comments below. We will be monitoring them, and I'm sure we can work with our generous panelists to get their response to questions that come up. They've been so wonderful with their time. Please make sure to check out SAQA and the Colorado, Utah, Wyoming region and our individual artists to see more about their work for all the reasons you just heard. You can follow the Brigham City Museum of Art and History on social media for up-to-date information on our programs, both online and in-house. If you're a photographer, quick plug, you still have until the close of this exhibit on September 17th to submit your pieces to our annual competition. This year's theme is the West, and you can find out more about the guidelines on our website. And make sure to mark your calendars now, because June through September of 2023, we will be hosting Light the World, which is a SAQA global exhibition. So far, that one has only shown in France and the Czech Republic, so you might want to consider a road trip to Brigham City while it's here. I guarantee it is one you will not want to miss. On behalf of the Brigham City Museum of Art and History and the entire Brigham City team, I want to thank you for joining tonight's roundtable. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.